The National Dialogue on Coalition Governments kicks off at the University of the Western Cape this morning. It is convened by Deputy President and Leader of Government Business, Paul Mashatile. President Cyril Ramaphosa is expected to deliver the keynote address. For more on this, we now bring in Samkele Maseko, SABC News reporter. Samkele, good morning. Thank you so much for making time for us. Some were even arguing to say that does this mean that there is a concession, at least from the ANC-led government as well, that there is a possibility of the National Assembly being hung?
Well, Aldrin, it's not yet clear whether it's an acceptance from the governing party, whether there will be a national coalition government come 2024. What we do know is that there is a moonshot pact being proposed by other political formations. This is not only a dialogue on the coalition at a national level, it's a dialogue on coalition governments across the board. I've seen various mayors here at this particular national dialogue. The mayor of Mangaung, I've seen the mayor of Johannesburg. I've not yet seen the mayor of the city of Cape Town, knowing of the taxi strike that is currently ensuing within this specific metro. But I'm going to bring in the Secretary General of the Good Party, where all political formations in the National Assembly and the provincial legislatures will be represented at this national dialogue. Mr. Barrett, just the essence of this dialogue. You as the Good Party, how do you see this dialogue only ensuing now, looking at how there is instability within various metro and local municipalities across the country?
So, I mean, we accept that coalition governments are an outcome of a democratic process where voters exercise their choice, and that choice results in no party having a majority in a particular council or legislature. So we're here to participate in forming a framework that will support democracy and not undermine the rights of the voters to choose. So any proposal that intends to restrict political rights that are enshrined in our Bill of Rights, we will not be supporting. But we understand the need to create an environment for stable coalitions to be able to govern and to govern in the interests of the people. But our bottom line is that the proportional representation system that the South African Constitution guarantees to every South African, that their vote will not be wasted because they will be proportionally represented in their legislatures or councils. That's our bottom line.
Mr. Barrett, when you look at the issue of coalitions, particularly within smaller parties, you've had a complaint coming from parties like the ANC, like the Democratic Alliance, that smaller political formations and councils who've got 1-2 seats in those councils are basically dictating the agenda and wanting senior positions within administrations. And when they don't get what they want, they cause the coalitions to collapse. What's the Good Party's view in trying to mitigate this huge turnover of executives and mayors in these metro municipalities and local municipalities?
Well, I would say that what we've seen in the city of Johannesburg, Tshwane and Nelson Mandela Bay, that it is the large or the old political parties, the old dominant political parties that have created the instability. I mean, in the city of Johannesburg, if the Action SA and the DA were able to agree on one mayoral candidate, they would be governing the city of Johannesburg right now. But it's the arrogance of dominance that is undermining the ability to form stable coalitions. And the expression of voters' choices gives rise to there being new parties represented in councils and legislatures around the country. And so for as long as we're giving expression to the voters' choice, there will be new players on the scene, and sometimes those new players do start out smaller than the old dominant parties. But this complaint that small parties are causing the instability is not true. What we've seen in the city of Johannesburg is it was the Democratic Alliance and the Action SA who are in this moonshot pact together, but who couldn't agree on one mayoral candidate.
When you look at the Democratic Alliance Moonshot Pact, which in essence speaks to collaborative governance and coalitions, as the Good Party, are you in agreement of being part of this Moonshot Pact, or you are outside?
Well, no, we do not support the Moonshot Pact at all. The Moonshot Pact is more about a gathering of political parties who have some things in common and other parts that have nothing in common. The only common thing is that they regard the ANC as an enemy. And any formation pre-elections that is premised on we must remove the ANC at all costs, but we may not agree on how we do what we do thereafter, is bound to fail. So I don't think the Moonshot Pact has got any prospects of displacing the ANC, and this certainly doesn't, in my mind, place the DA as leading an alternative government. What we need when we see coalitions and pacts is to make sure that we share values. And you start with values and visions for your country, and thereafter you see how you work together. But if your starting point is, let's remove the ANC, and that's the only thing you have in common, then I think your moonshot pact or any pact is bound to fail.
When you look at the current political and economic trajectory of the city of Cape Town, there is instability at this point in time due to the taxi strike. Is the city being unfair on the taxi owners, or are the taxi owners being unfair on the city?
I think the city has, for a long time, certainly in the last 5 years, used language that has created a hostile environment between the city and the taxi industry. Minibus taxis is the most important mode of public transport in South Africa right now. The minibus taxi industry, or minibus taxis, are moving more people, commuters, than any other mode of transport. And you cannot have a city government calling the minibus taxi industry criminals, thugs, and creating a hostile environment. The minibus taxi, from my experience when I was responsible for transport for nearly 9 years in the city of Cape Town, were always willing to engage. And you can find compromise in engagement in good faith. But the city has created this breakdown of a relationship between a really important mode of public transport and government. And what we're seeing now is an abuse of power by the city of Cape Town, and it's targeting the taxi industry instead of working with the taxi industry to improve the quality of the service and to make sure that there's better licensing processes and more routes that are activated.
Thank you very much, sir. Just lastly, what will be your key main points in this dialogue that are non-negotiables going into a framework or a bill looking into coalition governments?
That our constitution guarantees the right to proportional representation, and any proposal that undermines proportional representation we will not accept. And that includes introducing thresholds of 1 or 2%, which are designed to stop new players, new political parties entering into the election contestations.
Thank you very much. So that is the good party saying and presenting their non-negotiables when it comes to coalition governments. In fact, there are a number of political players now coming in. I am seeing the Busa leader, Mmusi Maimane. He's just walked in as well. I'm also seeing the deputy president of the IFP, Mr. Vilakazi, as well. I am going to try and grab them as soon as they come. Also seeing the IEC that has just also come in now, that will be part of this dialogue. As the political formations, Aldrin will be discussing the framework of coalition governments within the country. I am going to try and steal those two leaders of Busa and also the deputy president of the Inkatha Freedom Party, just to get a sense of who and what positions they will also be trying to push in this particular gathering. Mr. Maimane, just from Busa, what are some of the key points that you'll be pushing in this national dialogue of coalitions?
Thank you very much. First and foremost, it's that all part of it is about the transparency of negotiations. Secondly, it's that we are foregrounding a plan. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter if we debate positions, who occupies what position, etc. The most important thing is that taking from our constitution, South African citizens at home, what are some of the tangible plans that, regardless of which party you agreed on? And then lastly, we've got to involve the Public Service Commission so that we build a capable state. Because what's happened in the last number of years is that we've got a state that's weakened because of capture, and naturally you can't deliver regardless of what the plan is.
Will you be the candidate of the Moonshot Pact? Because the Freedom Plus says that you can't have a white person as a president currently?
If they nominate me, I think I'm open to having a conversation with them.
Thank you very much, Mr. Maimane. That is Mr. Maimane of Busa. I'm just going to bring in Mr. Bonginkosi Dhlamini of the Inkatha Freedom Party, who's also a member of the provincial legislature and the provincial chairperson of the IFP in Gauteng. Mr. Dhlamini, this discussion on coalitions, you were part of a coalition in Joburg, you were ultimately removed in Kuruleni and other parts of that particular province. How do you regulate these coalitions, and what is the IFP's position when it comes to the regulation and the bill that is coming on coalition governments?
I mean, the biggest challenge is that, one, you cannot really regulate coalitions. It depends on the morality and the principle of political parties, because you can only have a pre a pre-negotiation or pre-pact before elections because we don't know what is the outcome. I think here the only process we must get is that how do we really make sure that we all become responsible as citizens to respect the outcome of the elections. Because if you say you want to regulate, like for instance, let's make the proposal which is on the table here is that the party that got more seats must be the one that invites. But what if you get more seats and those that you must invite to form government are not people that you necessarily say eye to eye with? Therefore, for me, it's very difficult. But one is happy that there are these two processes that are taking place in our country. It tells you that there is reality that no one is going to win outright in the future. You've got the so-called Moon Pact, which now has been convened into a national convention of opposition parties, which is going to be chaired by an independent person. You've got this process which is initiated by the Office of the Deputy President, which is also discussing the same thing. Therefore, South Africans are beginning to embrace the issue of coalitions and saying how can we then behave, because regulation you cannot be able to do it because the outcome is determined by the voters.
When you look at the IFP, what is the IFP's main perspective and view when it comes to the Moonshot Pact? I have seen that you are invited and you have responded, and some of the issues that you were engaging in the letter sent to the DA, you said you want an independent person to chair this particular Moonshot Pact convention.
Oh yes, of course. With the collective, we have achieved what we wanted as the IFP. An independent person has been appointed to chair the convention of opposition political parties to look at the possibilities. Secondly, we've agreed that we're not going to sign anything prior elections because we must go to the electorate as independent parties, and then immediately all we are doing, in fact, for the IFP, these two processes, the convention of opposition parties chaired by the independent person and this convention initiated by the deputy president. For us, there are two processes that are saying, South Africa, let's live to reality. That is why, as the IFP, when we go to elections, as we did in the local government elections, that where there is IFP, you must be guaranteed that there will be stability, there will be good governance, there will be service delivery. Therefore, that is why we don't want to even commit or close door to anyone until the electorate has said how do they see the outcome of the elections.
Are you part of the National Council members of the IFP calling for Thabisa's head to roll?
There is no such in the IFP. As you see, as I told you, as the statement said, that the Secretary General of the IFP received a vague petition from so-called 20 members of the National Council, and of those I can tell you there are those that are saying no, this is not it, we're not part of it. Therefore, there is no mutiny in the IFP, there is no crisis.
The reality is, Mr. Bonginkosi, is that they are the AUs and the Triple Ks, which are two warring factions in the IFP. And seemingly, the AUs want Thabisa out and for Tamintuli to come in as the president of the IFP. Is this the beginning of a factional, intensive fight in the Inkatha Freedom Party?
I can guarantee you now that come Monday, you will see the IFP coming out united, coming out behind Thabisa as the president, because remember, there is a resolution of the IFP conference which elected the President Thabisa that said we must use the next few years to celebrate and conserve the legacy of Prince Mangosuthu Buthele's. Therefore, the election and handing over to Thabisa is part of the legacy. Therefore, anyone who is fighting that pact, he's fighting the legacy of Mangosuthu Buthele's. And I can assure you, there is no such thing. There was, yes, I must concede, there was such thing as AUs and so forth and Triple Ks. But as I speak to you now, all leaders are working full hand to make sure that we fight these factions, because we cannot do what we have seen in other parties. We have seen what has killed COPE, we have seen what has killed PAC, we have seen what has killed NFP. Therefore, the IFP cannot be stupid and repeat the same mistake.
So you are currently divided? You are in
No. We're not divided.
But who are
remember, we're a democratic party. There is elections coming next year. People are positioning themselves in every party and their ambitions. That is acceptable, as long as it is done within the confines of the rules of the IFP.
So you are basically saying, kukhona abazibona bengumongameli?
Not now, because the conference is only in 5 years' time. You cannot have a conference in mid-term.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bonginkosi Dhlamini, who is the provincial chairperson of the IFP. You can see that those political parties have now started trickling in. I have seen a number of them. I have been trying to look out for the leader of the Democratic Alliance, Mmusi, Maimane, Aldrin have not yet been able to locate him. We are seeing Somatota Figeni there, who is a former political analyst. I've also seen a number of other public representatives, and we also got the opportunity to engage with who is also the Minister of Transport, Thembisile Chukunga. As the show goes on, we will be able to play that particular up sound. I am now trying to just bring in the National Minister of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, Aldrin, before I throw back to you in studio. Minister, you've been very passionate about this issue of coalitions. Are you finally getting to a place where you can regulate them and put thresholds in place?
Yes, I think we are. We have put quite a few recommendations to political parties which we would like them to look into. For example, the change of the constitution with regard to threshold. That may only be at local government, but there is an electoral act which is already under Minister Mtsoaledi's care to ensure that how do you make a representation. But you also need a constitution to guarantee a time period on when you need to form a coalition immediately after elections. And that was not well stipulated. Suffice to say, at local government, it says 14 days, which we have realized in the metros. They go sometimes up to 60, 90 days without a council. And there's no transitional movement of what happens for the city to be able to run. But also looking into legislating and publication of the agreements themselves, that is the coalition. For you as a community member to know what is this agreement about, how will I hold them accountable, how will I make sure that I get back to get accountability on the people that have also elected me. Introduction of thresholds, you need to be elected by a certain number of people, but also a party that has gained the highest percentage needs to be given a right ticket, the first pass of ticket to negotiate within a particular time frame to form a government. We could then agree if they can't, the ticket passes to the next one. Or you just close as you did in Abakulusi. This is the only municipality in the country in 20 years where they were in one time unable to form a government, and we dissolved, we went back to elections because there was no agreement and there was no form of tangible activity that could be put into council. And I do believe that coalitions are a reality of democracy, but managing them is what government needs to be able to learn into.
Minister, how do you then cross the Rubicon where you've got a party, smaller parties like the IFP, like Good Party, who are saying that when you introduce thresholds, you are closing out new entry players within the political space, and you are only protecting the political needs of the big players, your ANCs, your democratic alliances?
No, well, if you look at it, let's look at the city of eThekwini. The mayor is running with 24 parties, and it's a coalition. And you have got to adopt a budget. But if you put just 1%, and a percent, just one, can't be a close-up of people, of everybody who's in the population register, of eThekwini in this instance. They must go out as communities, express themselves. The small parties will have a voice. They will have a voice on PR. They will have a voice in other ways of how you get into council and in the ward. Nobody will close you in a ward, but you've got to have a threshold. You can't get 10 votes in a community where there are 10,000 people and you say, I represent the entire community. So we're suggesting a 1%. In other countries, it goes as high as 5%. But these are other learnings we are getting from countries that have grappled. In Kenya, in Denmark. And the good thing about political parties this time is that they have worked and they are sitting on the table. Contrary to 2015, 2016, you couldn't even bring them out, Salga president, at the table to discuss a possibility of a coalition. But today, they are on the table. They've visited some of the countries as parliament with their whipparing political parties just to learn on how best to manage a coalition.
Thank you very much, Minister. That is Minister Nkadimeng, who is speaking on the essence of coalition governments within the country. The national dialogue will commence at about 11 o'clock, 10 o'clock this morning. It is convened by the Deputy President of the Republic of South Africa, Paul Mashatile. Aldrin.